Horror movies are probably best watched without any distractions and nothing in your hands. That way you have nothing keeping you from putting both hands over your eyes. Now, we've spent a lot of time in this podcast over the years talking about how it's very hard to scare me. That wasn't always true, but it has been for, I don't know, maybe 20 years. So maybe it's cool if a seasoned veteran of scary movies like me has things in his hands while watching films like Black Christmas. For instance, when I watched it a few days ago, my hands are occupied with my laptop because I was typing out notes, but I also had a tasty beverage at the ready. No snacks, though. I'm not an octopus. I bet some of you are tough guys and girls while watching films like this, too, so I recommend you fill those not-shaking hands with a mug of Sparkplug coffee. They're the internet Java dealers who provide the freshest, fairly traded, premium Arabica beans that can be rustled up in Canada. Delivery is free for people like me and our fellow Canadians, but Americans will also get shipments sent within a week, just as Canucks will. Only you Yanks will have to pay for shipping. Since the border has to be crossed, that's only reasonable. If you like drinking just one blend and want to stick with that, great. But Sparkplug offers a whole menu of roasts and blends, including rotating seasonal blends. Decaf and half-calf can be ordered too, if that's how you like your brew. And try this. Become a member in the Autopilot Coffee Club. Perks and deals are available to members in a way that they aren't for more casual buyers. You'll also save money on every order, and you can customize to get your orders when you actually need more beans. This is not a, look, I didn't need another order yet you send it anyway. Type Coffee of the Month Club. Typing sparkplug.coffee/HYES into your computer or your device will save you 20% off your next order. Our HYES promo code is the one-time key to keeping some dollars in your pocket when you buy your new favorite gourmet coffee. Very well, you've been served your notice about Sparkplug. Now I'm going to serve you some notice about the details of the spine chiller of a 1970s horror flick. And action! Have you ever seen Black Christmas? Hey, fans of frightening flicks, and thanks for your download or your stream of the 614th edition of Have You Ever Seen? This podcast strolls back into cinema's past and doles out spoiler-drenched reviews of the classics we feel like talking about. Spoilers are just drenched all over this thing. I'm your host, someone who clearly didn't die while attending college, Ryan Ellis. Or maybe I'm a ghost. Been a ghost all this time. No, my wife Bev would usually chime in right at this point to say hi, but it's a Friday, and she doesn't do the talking about movies thing unless it's a Monday. Well, this is movie number 1 in Scary Movie Month 2024 edition. We'll be talking about horror flicks of one type or another throughout October, although a few of those spooky extravaganzas are actually horror comedies, and one of them is debatably a scary movie at all. One of the other ones beyond the comedies is debatably a scary movie at all, but I'm going to make the point that it is in a couple weeks. What are those funny films that are also hair-raising? Well, I'll be promoting those at the end of today's show. But as for Black Christmas, it only goes for larfs a few times early on. It's generally pretty horrifying. Okay, it didn't scare me, but that's hard to do. I do appreciate the craft that went into this movie, though. So when I review movies on my own, I detail the plot in sequential order. I go on many asides and tangents. I sometimes warble a tune. And if you like tomfoolery in your podcast, the way I do tomfoolery, then maybe you'll enjoy some of my goofy attempts at humor. In keeping with recent tradition, I'll also rattle off 3 trivia questions at the end of today's episode. These are questions I took from our trivia nights I've hosted for our friends ever since the pandemic started, so these are about 4 years old. I don't think they're inaccurate because the facts have changed in the meantime. I hope not. I probably should be careful of that when I do these. But all that will happen only after I yammer on about Bob Clark's Freaky Deaky Flicker Show. Clark's Canadian production was released up here on October 11th, 1974. And then this 50-year-old motion picture hit American screens on December 20th that year. So we could see it on Halloween, and that makes sense. But it is called Black Christmas, so you can understand releasing it for Americans right before Ho-Ho Day. Wikipedia has this flick that was budgeted at not even $700,000, making $4 million worldwide. It sounds like it was a relative failure with critics and at the box office at first. So I guess staying in theaters for a while helped, which most movies got to do back then, even the ones that didn't find an audience immediately. This isn't thought of as a classic by the critics on Rotten Tomatoes, though. Only 68% of them point their thumb in an upwards direction. Just 26 out of 38 reviewers have said this is worth your time. 76% of audiences like it, though, so that's a little bit better. But apparently Steve Martin is a big fan of this film. Yes, Steve Martin, the comic, the actor. And how can you argue with Steve? The 2006 remake of The Blackest of Christmases was not treated with respect by almost any critic, though. It's only at 14% on Rotten Tomatoes. The 2019 version was met with sour faces, too. Only 40% of critics thought that was any good. And if I was on Rotten Tomatoes as a critic, I'd be with the 60%, because I thought the 2019 one was a pile of puke. I'm not sure if I've seen the 2006 one. No version of Black Christmas has ever been up for any Oscars, but the original was a 3-time winner at the Canadian Film Awards. I'm not sure they have that anymore. They call it the CSAs now, and it's both television and film together. Margot Kidder won Best Actress, plus Kenneth Healy-Ray won for his sound editing, and Stan Cole was honored for his film editing. Kidder's win was an odd choice. She's fun and gets to play a great death scene. She looks great, but she's barely in this, and she's dead long before the climax, so she has nothing to do with anything at the end. It's a Canadian flick, so we can't talk about any American Film Institute recognition, and of course Congress wouldn't put a foreign film into the National Film Registry. Or have they? Well, I guess they can't if it's an American thing, right? Well, in any case, that's all the plaudits I have, so let's get into the plot. The film is set in Bedford, not Bedford Falls. I think that's supposed to be a play on Bedford Falls by calling it that, but anyway. And it's supposed to be an American town, even though production took place in and around the city where I've lived for 24 years, Toronto. In fact, the location they use for the police station is only about a 10-minute walk from my house. And I could see Russia from my house, too. On that note, Chris and I said when we covered Youngblood for our sports movie podcast, Scoring at the Movies, which we don't do anymore, but we did for many years, we said that some of the hockey scenes were filmed at Ted Reeve Arena. Well, that's a stone's throw from where the Black Christmas police station is, and that's even closer to my house. Can't see Russia from there, though. Got to be from my house specifically. The basic story here is that it's just before Christmas, and a sorority house has been invaded by a mysterious killer who proves to be shockingly insane. He kills several of the girls who live in the house, along with their house mother and a cop. He's outside the house, though, in his car, in fact, I think. And we never find out why. Nobody even knows that the first victim and the house mother's dead bodies are still up there in the attic, where they'll still be even when the movie is over. Olivia Hussey is Jess, the pregnant girl who keeps on dealing with obscene phone calls that get progressively more disturbing. But who's making the calls? Keir Dullea is her off-kilter boyfriend Peter, and he's the father of her unborn baby. And Margot Kidder is Barb, who's actually a fairly insignificant character, despite the fact she won that award I just talked about. So let's open up the storybook and dig deeper into this thing. As the opening titles play, it's nearly Christmas, and we hear evidence of that because Silent Night is heard, while the shot shows us the Christmas-lighted sorority house at 6 Belmont Street. That could be the opening for a tranquil motion picture. It was most tranquil. But nope. Instead, we get a heavy-breathed killer's point of view, approaching the house as the girls party inside with some of their friends. Brian De Palma's movie within a movie and Blowout parodied this kind of opening. You could argue that Jaws opens the same way too, although what Spielberg is doing is certainly not a parody, and apparently he was actually homaging and referencing Creature from the Black Lagoon, which we're covering this month. And I say it's similar because we see the shark's point of view right before it attacks Chrissy. Halloween's opening certainly wasn't parodying anything either. It just used the same device, which allowed for John Carpenter and his team to come up with one of the greatest opening sequences in horror history. Of course, Jaws is that too. So is Black Christmas. Great openings. And the dude with this point of view sounds like he should see a doctor about that breathing. He's not even wearing a mask the way that Michael Myers does in Halloween, so what's his excuse? Asthma? Go see a doctor, dude. You're in Canada. At least to film and production, you're in Canada. We have free healthcare. Get it while you can. It might not be true for too many more years up here. Anyway, the killer slinks his way into the house from the attic above, and that's where he'll spend most of his time throughout the film. Inside, we find Barb milling about. Man, is Kidder lovely in this movie. We're introduced to most of the key characters, including Jess, who's also flat out beautiful in this. Another key sorority sister is Phil, short for Phyllis, who's the Andrea Martin character. Even before the secret home invasion that just happened, they say that the house has been getting obscene phone calls from a moaning guy. They even call him the Moaner, who really mixes it up when he calls the house in this scene, including screaming a little and then doing pig noises, then laughing. At least this weirdo's creative. I think he went on to run for president of the United States in 3 consecutive elections. Anyway, Barb grabs the phone and tells the creep off, who says he'll do vile things to her, then in a serious voice announces, "I'm going to kill you." Barb sloughs it off as this guy is having the fastest tongue in the West, but this whole experience has a few of the other girls on edge. One of the unsettled ones is Lynn Griffin, who plays Claire, and she's so unsettled by this call that she goes upstairs to pack her suitcase. But as the other girls say hello to the house mother, Mrs. Mack, who's arriving right then at the front door, Claire is grabbed by the killer in her own closet and smothered with a big plastic bag, the kind you get from a dry cleaner. It's a fantastic jump scare, too. And one of the great images in the history of scary movies is Claire's dead face, still stuffed in plastic up in the attic, which we're going to see a lot in the next 90 minutes. None of her housemates heard any of this, and they never do find out about it. There's something chilling in that fact. Claire dies, and the credits roll in this thing without anyone having any idea about it, and for that matter, the house mother later on dies too, still up there. The story takes place over the course of only a few days, so it's not like she was rotting up there for weeks, or the house mother, but still, innocent girl dies, and that's that. And the house mother. Keir Dullea makes his first appearance by calling Jess on the phone, So it's not even an appearance yet, per se. He's just vocal. Peter has been studying hard and working on his piano playing at the conservatory, but just wanted to say hello to his girlfriend. She seems to really need her man in her life, but he's not been there for her for a while. Meantime, Marion Waldman, as Mrs. Mack, is doing some comic relief business as she pulls bourbon bottles out of the secret stash in the bookcase. Then she reveals a booze bottle that's attached to a cord inside the top of the toilet. It's a Homer Simpson gag, isn't it? At one point he has a beer in there. She even gargles with what she finds in that bottle, and that's after she had been brushing her teeth. I guess these comic beats were Clark's contribution to the script, and that makes sense when you remember that many of his other films were comedies. I think most of the ones you know the best at least were comedies. He's more well known for making people laugh than for making people shriek, although he does that oh so well in this case. Oh so well. But after that humorous little visit with the old lady, we get another angle of Lynn Griffin's dead face encased in plastic with her mouth wide open, and the killer crazily singing a song. Whatever anyone thinks of this movie, this is a fantastic 15 or 16 minutes to set the scene. This film has those ties to Halloween I mentioned. In fact, making a scary movie out of October 31st was Clark's idea originally, not Carpenter's. But not even Halloween sets a scene any better than that. Well, okay, maybe the over-the-top comedy wasn't entirely necessary, so I guess maybe Carpenter's opening was better and Jaws' was. But still, this is a fantastic opening. I've said that enough. Anyway, Claire's dad shows up the next day to meet up with his daughter, but since she no-shows because she's dead and all, he happens to run into Peter. Old Petey boy tells him where to find the sorority. Mrs. Mack is no help when he gets there, as he disdainfully announces that he's very disappointed in this atmosphere, and he really doesn't appreciate the salacious artwork on the walls. Mrs. Mack is one permissive mentor to these college girls. What's she supposed to do, monitor their morality? The house cat Claude was on the scene. Claude, that's the name of the cat. He was on the scene when Claire was killed. Well, Mrs. Mack hears him and Clark sets it up that she's about to be killed on the staircase, but Mr. Harrison is the one who pops his head up from downstairs, not the man who's made a home in the attic. The two adults leave as Clark pulls back to reveal the killer watching up in the attic with the smothered Claire framed between him and the two older people getting into the car down on the street. Outstanding shot. Jess finds Peter practicing piano in the conservatory and tells him that she's preggers. Peter practicing piano, preggers, which throws him, but she wants to get rid of it. Apparently the filmmakers didn't want to get all political with any of this, nor turn her into someone who makes her own choices about how to protect herself, which she will do at the end, while maybe not wanting to keep protecting the baby inside of her. But whether they were going for that subtext or not, it's curious that this movie came out a year after Roe v. Wade became America's law of the land. So even if they didn't want to politicize this part of the movie, it was certainly on everybody's mind in the early to mid-70s. And I guess it had been before too, but now it was legal, no matter what the religious types wanted. And now it's not legal anymore, but it was a year before this. The prank caller gets Jess on the phone and performs a lot of voices again, really freaking her out this time. But while she's dealing with that, Barb, Phil, and Mr. Harrison go to the cops to fill out a missing persons report about Claire. And in true Margot Kidder fashion, she cracks open a beer in the police station. This movie has a bit of a National Lampoon feel to it in the scenes with Mrs. Mack and Barb. I guess she's old enough, but is she old enough to do that? Barb doubles down on her bodiness by telling the cop at the desk that her phone number begins with FE. So she says that stands for fellatio, just like according to The Simpsons, 555 is Klondike 53226. Call now and receive a free t-shirt. And I like how Kidder opens her mouth a little more than she needs to while the oblivious desk sergeant is jotting down the number. Maybe Clark told her to do that. I bet it was something she came up with on her own. Kidder was a free spirit in real life, to put it mildly, so this character seems to be very close to her true self. John Saxon makes his first appearance at this point. He's Lieutenant Ken Fuller, I love saying lieutenant, who's challenged by Claire's boyfriend Chris to do something about how Claire seems to have disappeared. Art Hindle plays Chris. He's a veteran of horror movies, also playing Jeffrey in the 1978 remake of Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Probably better than the original movie, by the way. Very good film. And he was in Cronenberg's The Brood a year or two after that. Back at the house, Barb gets to be drunk as a monkey and accuses everyone of blaming her for Claire's disappearance. No one does seem to be blaming her, but sauced people go half-cocked about stupid things sometimes. And that outburst is followed up by Peter in the conservatory taking a microphone stand and beating the living poop out of his piano. I guess the audition we saw earlier, or whatever that was, didn't go well. Or he really wants Jess to pop out his progeny, and the fact that she wants to abort it is causing him to do things that a vicious killer might do. Everyone bundles up on a cold night because the cops tell them that they're all going to search for Claire in a nearby park. They've got dogs, they've got skidoos, they've got determination. Mrs. Mack doesn't join them, though. Even though it would make sense that a supposedly responsible person would pitch in to find the girl, she instead prepares to head home for the holidays. There's no place like home for the holidays. It's actually a decent way to write her out of the movie. After she gets whacked too, along with Claire, no one's going to know why they should even be searching for her the way that they are searching for Claire. But Mac isn't dead just yet. Clark shows off his ghoulish side when, while Mac is getting her suitcase ready, the cat Claude ends up in the attic and sniffs at Claire's dead body. It licks her face through the plastic? That's both sad and also sinister. The cat misses Mommy, or it wants to eat her corpse. A music cue tells us that Mac is in trouble as she climbs up the stairs to the attic to find the puss, and she gets nice and dead when, right after she spots Claire's corpse in the rocking chair, she takes a meat hook to the face. The killer's back to breathing heavily as he watches from the window while Mrs. Mac's cabbie gives up and drives off. He's so upset. Then the attic aficionado goes nuts and starts smashing things, similar to how we just saw Peter beat the living crap out of his piano. If I didn't know better, I might say they want us to believe this is Peter. The search party does find the dead body, but we know, of course, it's not who they were looking for because she's back at the house. Instead, it's some poor kid who never even see the girl's body, although her mother does, and freaks out. Jess gets home from the search in time to answer another obscene phone call. This guy is really going nuts now, causing her to hang up. She hasn't got time for this madness. I'm amazed she bothers giving him 5 seconds at this point. When I used to pick up the phone before we had call display, if I didn't get a response to hello, or if anything like this was going on, even for a few seconds, it'd be bye-bye. I'm hanging up and I'm moving on. When my mom would answer the phone, sometimes I'd hear her say hello about 8 times, and I'd think, just hang up. They had their chance. Our director man, Bob, continues to make us believe Peter's the killer because the camera stalks behind Jess for a minute when she tries to call the cops about the prank caller. But it's Peter who ends up being the one coming down to find her in the hallway. Don't forget, it's been established that a point of view shot is the murderer, so knowing where the story goes makes this scene a little bit of a cheat. Pete claims he was napping up in Jess's room while she and others were out hunting for Claire. That's the excuse. Our deceased dog Sam would appreciate that excuse. Even when important things are going on, you gotta get your rest, and a snack, and then some more rest. Peter says he's lived in one room for 8 years and he's tired of it, so he's quitting the conservatory, and we're getting married. Well, la-dee-da, Mr. Bossy. Jess seems stunned by this because he had said he wanted to be a concert pianist, and she still has dreams she'd just have to give up entirely if she had a baby. Plus, she doesn't want to marry him in the first place. He seems to be able to accept that, but he won't let the baby issue go. Oh, pro-choice v. pro-life. The eternal cage match of American politics. Mind your own business, you religious nuts. It's her body, not yours. Clark might not have meant to be making a feminist point here, and I don't think he was, is what he said, but this ages very well. Barb's fellatio gag pays off when the oblivious Sergeant Nash is confronted by Fuller about it, and a guy credited as Laughing Detective is acting like he's at the greatest comedy show of all time. What's this funny, my man? Although him cackling like this is strangely unsettling, which I'm sure is the point. Could this maniac be the maniac? Scream owes this movie a debt too, doesn't it? It planted a lot of seeds like this. Well, it could be this guy, it could be the cop, it could be the principal, before we finally find out at the end that it was 2 people, too, doing all that, which is something I'll come to in a little bit with this review. But the Peter-Jess debate isn't over, so we go back to that scene. He says she'll be very sorry if she gets an abortion, then he storms out just as Phil and Fuller come into the house. I'm sure he was thinking, I'm sorry, Jess, I'm afraid you can't do that. And Fuller came into the house to set up a tap on the house's phone so we can trace this obscene caller. By the way, of course I got that backwards. It was Dave who couldn't do that. Hal warned him, but I think you get the reference. Fuller also investigates Claire's room, and I was reminded here that she only went missing the night before. It seems like it's been a lot longer than that. And I'm surprised that Fuller and the other cops take her disappearance this seriously, considering it's only been about 24 hours. I thought someone had to be MIA for a full 2 days before the authorities would do anything. Or is that just a movie thing, maybe? During all this, we see Peter outside in the cold with no coat on as the cops leave. Would a normal human skulk around outside with no coat on a cold winter's night when he doesn't have to? Phil, meanwhile, maybe he's not normal. Oh, I don't know. It may not be normal. Well, he did beat his piano half to death, so he's a little off anyway. Phil, meanwhile, is crying on Jess's shoulder about what's been going on the past day or so, and she doesn't even know there are 2 dead bodies upstairs to be even more upset about. Phil is wiped out and needs to sleep, so she heads upstairs, leaving Jess all alone. I like the touch that as these two say goodnight, a dog is barking nonstop outside. Something bad must be going on if a dog won't stop barking, right? Maybe it's even barking at Peter. That's film language, baby, even if we all know that dogs bark all the time for no good reason. After we see the killer rocking Claire in the rocking chair he's put her in, and now he's got her clutching a teddy bear too, Jess waits by the phone with the fireplace framed behind her. That shot, which is helped by how beautiful this woman is in profile, or any angle really, is another great shot by Clark and his cinematographer, Reginald Morris. We haven't seen Barb in a while, but Jess shows up to help with the party animal's inhaler when she wakes up from a bad dream. She's having a nightmare on Belmont Street. Now, it's rare that Christmas carolers have been ominous, even in a horror movie, but a bunch of kids singing, "Oh, come, all ye faithful," drowns out the sounds of Billy using a unicorn figurine to stab Barb to death. Since Jess went down to the door to enjoy the warbling of the carolers, she doesn't hear the 3-time murderer finishing off her friend. Now that another corpse has been created, the house gets another call. with the tracer and Fuller listening in at the cop shop this time. We hear all kinds of weird screaming on the phone and a repeat of the fight Peter and Jess just had. They said that online, but I didn't really feel like I heard that specifically. But anyway, apparently it's repeated, the dialogue they just had. I don't think literally them is what's supposed to be. He's repeating them in his own voice. Also in a Psycho touch, we hear a woman's voice, although we know for sure it's a guy up in the attic. Although come to think of it, we've heard a woman's voice at other times during these obscene calls too. This guy belongs in jail for a lot of reasons, but maybe he should look into doing voiceover work in film or television if he ever gets out. He's got a gift. I thought Phil was doomed when she went upstairs to bed, but somehow she's still alive. Jess confesses to good old Phyllis how scared she is. But you're in a sorority house. You don't have to stay there. If you don't feel safe, maybe just go home or try to bunk with a friend from class just for a night or two. You have options, Jessica. Couldn't you stay with Peter even though things aren't going that well? Peter calls to apologize and he cries about how they can't kill the baby. The tracer can't lock onto where the calls are coming from, though, because the movie isn't over yet. This movie would not work so well in the era of call display and Star 69. Can you still do Star 69? I don't know, maybe you can. I know they remade this a few times, but those remakes sucked, and maybe this mysterious phone call angle doesn't work as well in the age of call display and Star 69, and that was part of the problem. And they stank, those other movies. Fuller calls Jess and wants her to level with him, thinking she's not telling him the whole truth about what's going on here. Suddenly, she remembers that Peter was there with her when one of the calls came in, so it couldn't be Peter. I guess it could be Peter and somebody else doing this together, though, like I said about Scream. The lieutenant, tells her that she needs to stay on the line longer during the calls so they can get a trace, but she finds it hard to put up with it for very long. Can't blame her. Phil, who's defying the odds by still being alive, is now ready for her moment of truth as she knocks on Barb's door, which quickly slams shut with an ominous sound, so we know she's doomed. Finally, she's doomed. I don't want her to die, but you know she's going to. Meanwhile, Jess locks up the whole house after realizing that, other than the front door, most of the doors and windows weren't locked. Were people really this cavalier about locking doors in a fairly big house back in the 70s? Especially at Christmas time when I believe there are typically more break-ins? And they've had a guy threaten them repeatedly during his phone calls? The killer's call to Jess this time is a wild one, with a lot of, "Where's the baby?" It dawns on Jess that the call may be coming from inside the house. That's supposed to be a big suspense thing, this movie, but don't we know that he's the one calling? Maybe not from the very beginning, but most of the movie, and we know he's in the house the whole time? Anyway, I love how Clark shoots Hussey here, through the posts of the staircase. Something like that suggests that she's in prison, which I guess in a way she is, if she's forced to keep a baby she doesn't want. Although she can't be forced. It sounds like she's not going to listen to him, to Peter. The phone rings again, and Jess picks up because she knows she has to. Fuller needs the trace. It's pretty smart writing, actually, because if not for the cops asking her to keep answering the phone and, in fact, stay on the line through the bad guy's ramblings, she would have stopped picking up 10 calls ago. But it's not Peter and it's not the killer, it's the sergeant who's on the line now, begging her to not hang up the phone, but to walk out the front door because the calls are coming from inside the house. And that's a key line in When a Stranger Calls, which came out at the end of the 70s. And they remade that, too. Anyway, Jessie Jess is worried about Phil and Barb, so she first screams upstairs for them to, "Please answer!" Then she grabs a poker from the fireplace when they don't. Yeah, she should absolutely not be doing this, except I'll grant you that she cares about her friends and also doesn't know what the man in the attic has been doing. No one knows. And she finds Barbara and Phyllis, but they're piled up on Barb's bed, both covered in blood and dead as Dillinger. By the way, Jess, of course, has an English accent because Olivia Hussey had one. You could say, well, how'd she have that in this house? Well, transfer student, I guess. Maybe grew up in London or something like that, and now has come to America. Maybe the last few years has came to America. In one of the classic shots in 70s horror, Jess sees the Murdiddly-Urdler behind Barb's door, Murdiddly-Urdler, whispering about Agnes, as he's been doing in other calls, and Billy, as one of his, well, he's supposed to be Billy, isn't he? As one of his wide-open eyes stares at her. Before he can add her body to the pile, she slams the door into him and runs downstairs. He follows her in a rage, but she hides in a closet and he gives up the chase. I appreciate the detail, by the way, that Billy's eye is brown, but Keir Dullea's eyes are blue, so Petey Boy couldn't have been the killer. I didn't notice that, but they pointed out online, so I got to give them credit online for that. And you'd think a woman who slept with him would recognize his eyes a little better than that. Although I guess she didn't have time to study his eye when it was peering at her through the door crack. She was panicked and not thinking logically. She wanted her friends to answer. Well, she knows they're dead now. Jess ends up in the basement and catches sight of some guy outside who's backlit and looking like he's going to force his way in. And when you know it, it's Peter. He calls her name and sounds normal as he's doing it. Doesn't sound like that wacko upstairs. But she must be thinking that this is just an act to lure her in. Although let's not forget that she acknowledged to the cops only a few minutes ago that he was in her sight while she was on the phone with the killer earlier in the movie. So why does she think he's coming after her? Anyway, the father of her baby breaks the window to get in as she silently slips back into darkness. He comes towards her, still seeming normal enough, not especially threatening, But as we cut out to the street right when Fuller and his cohorts are arriving, they hear her screams inside. Fuller breaks down the basement door only to find a bloody Peter laying on top of Jess, who seems passed out. She beat him to death with the poker, I guess. Wait, he didn't even try to defend himself? If she shot him, that would be one thing. It'd be quick, done, bang, or maybe even stabbed him. But she offed him with the poker? I guess it was smart that it happened off screen, so we didn't have to see him barely do anything to defend himself, because obviously he didn't do much of anything to defend himself. Claire's dad, for some reason, ends up hanging out with the cops in Jess's room. She went into shock or something after that unpleasantness with Peta, and now so does Mr. Harrison. It's a double shot of shock. The cops hustle Daddy-O downstairs so they can get him to the hospital, yet apparently she shouldn't see a doctor right away, even though they know she just suffered a trauma after she killed a guy, her boyfriend. But the fuzz turn out the lights and allow her to rest so they can deal with Harrison. Nobody stays with her? Even if you think all is well now, nobody stays in the house or the room or something with her? But this ain't over. The camera slowly tracks out of her room into the hallway and shows the bloodstained mattress in Barb's room. Then the attic door opens a smidge, and then we see that Mrs. Mack and Claire's corpses are still up there, and so is the killer, who's rambling away. Which I guess means after he chased her downstairs and couldn't find her in that closet, he said, "Oh well, I'll go back up to my little hovel in the attic, and that's it for me." Clark cuts to outside the house, and we eventually hear the phone ringing again. Now this is a fantastic unresolved ending. Jess is a sitting duck, and it's a reasonable theory many have that he's already killed her in the time it took for the cameras to cut outside, or camera, because he always called the house after he caused someone to stop breathing. And Jess is the only one left in the sorority house for him to murder. But even though this ending is memorable, let me get this straight. 4 people were killed by Billy in that house, and they know about 2 of them, Barb and Phil, and a guy was just killed in the basement too, and their cop buddy was killed outside the house. And they not only don't get the traumatized girl out of there, but they leave her there alone? And yeah, the murderer was supposedly Peter, and he's dead now, but what makes them so sure that Peter was the killer? Where's the evidence? Fuller knows that Jess claimed she saw Peter while Billy was talking to her on the phone. So either he had a partner, or he didn't do it. This is terribly irresponsible police work. And also, these idiots didn't search the whole house before they leave it? It's not a crime scene that's locked down for a few days? Not necessarily would they search to find other bodies because they didn't know about them, but if 2 sorority girls were killed in their own house and a third one's missing, it stands to reason that maybe a no longer breathing Claire is somewhere on the grounds too, dead. So even though it's a creepy and effective finale, it also bugged the shinola out of me that these plot holes would be so glaring. The shinola, not the shinola. I guess Clark might have felt the way Spielberg did about the Sharko Amano ending in Jaws the very next year. It's a bit ridiculous, but Steve's thinking was, if I've got them up until now, they'll ride with me for another minute or so, or I guess a few seconds, really. Shark versus Brody. And yes, I'm playing armchair quarterback 50 years later, but that is one of my jobs in this podcast. As for Billy and who he was and what his motives were, I guess we'll never know. And that's a big part of the appeal of this film. The unconfirmed angle that this guy must be greasing these innocent people for a reason, but we never find out what that reason is. To some degree, that's the angle in Halloween, too. Except Michael is going home to Haddonfield. It's not just a random place where he stalks babysitters. We have no idea why Billy thinks these girls deserve to be nice and dead. Or the cop, and Mrs. Mack. I could tell you that an elaborate backstory explaining who Billy and Agnes are was used in the 2006 remake, literalizing everything about the killer and sucking all the mystery out of it. And yes, in that backstory, the psycho killer was, of course, abused as a boy and ended up killing his parents. That might not have been a cliche in 1974, but it's such a cliche in the 50 or so years since. It's always about how they were abused, and I'm sure that's real and true and everything, but such a crutch. As for that ringing telephone at the end, it's a well-known finale and haunting, but think about what it implies. Of course, it suggests this isn't over, but also that eventually somebody is going to answer that phone. Or if not right then, he'll call again when he knows someone is in the house. Will it be Jess? If he didn't already kill her. Will she wake up and deal with this nonsense again, then realize that she killed an innocent man? And her boyfriend at that, that's who she killed. And in a movie about threatening telephone calls, it's fitting that a jingle, jangle, jingle would be the last thing we hear. I've got calls that jingle, jangle, jingle. Just as the outside of the house is the first and last visual in Black Christmas. So the cast, which apart from Dullea, Saxon, and Hussey, most of them were Canadian actors, including the 2 who ended up dumped on top of each other, Margot Kidder and Andrea Martin. Although Martin was born in Maine, she became a Canadian citizen because she married a Canucker. But yeah, when you make a film in my country, you have to use a certain number of Canadians. It's always been a rule. It's one reason why Colm Fiore has been in so many movies. He's a good actor, but he wanted to play a cop or something like that, and not necessarily leading role. Chicago, for example. There you go, Canadian content. Well, Olivia Hussey is Argentinian, although I believe she grew up in England. The Huss made her name playing one of the title characters, and I think you can guess which one, in Franco Zeffirelli's 1968 version of Romeo and Juliet. She was also in the 1970s version of Death on the Nile. She was Mother Bates in the TV movie Psycho 4. And my God, was she a dream to look at for 97 minutes. Hussey is 73 and still active, but hasn't been in anything in 9 years. I got reading about how she's the textbook example of the final girl. Jess is on a lot of best of lists, in fact, that rank her as one of the greatest final girls ever. I guess no one tops Jamie Lee Curtis in Halloween, though. Margot Kidder no longer shares the earth with Olivia. She died in 2018 when she wasn't quite 70, but her main claim to fame was, of course, playing Lois Lane in the Superman films in the 70s and 80s. She and her friend Jennifer Salt also worked with Brian De Palma in Sisters the year before this. That's a pretty solid psychological thriller. And she kept on doing horror movies after this, including the Amityville Horror at the end of the decade. But it was playing Lois in Superman that changed her life. And it was not an easy life. She was full of some pith and possibly even some vinegar in these days of the early 70s, but she shares three major things with Carrie Fisher: beauty, being typecast in an iconic role, and addiction. I think Kidder also had mental illness issues. She was bipolar or something like that. But she was likable, pretty, and talented, so it's a shame her career wasn't even bigger than it was. If I didn't mention, by the way, I covered Superman last year, was it? And she was good in that. Keir Dullea was big, coming off of 2001, 6 years before this, 2001: A Space Odyssey. I like the sequel, 2010, quite a lot too. He isn't the main character in The Year We Make Contact, that's Roy Scheider, even though he's the main man in the first movie. Well, the part that's not the monkey documentary, but he was vital in the sequel all the same. He was also in the acclaimed David and Lisa about a decade before he was in Black Christmas. He's nearly 90 and still acting. He's effective in this movie, even if he's a lot too old to play a college student. He was nearly 40. John Saxon was a working actor like Dullea was, and did it for even longer than Keir did. Saxon had a pretty memorable couple of years there back in the early 70s. The man was in the blockbuster Bruce Lee flick Enter the Dragon in 1973. Chris and I covered that on Scoring at the Movies. Then in 1984, he played Nancy's father in A Nightmare on Elm Street, a role not unlike what he's asked to do in this. He's not just his father, but he's a father figure, and a cop in both movies. He was also in at least a couple of the Nightmare sequels. We reviewed Wes Craven's original Elm Street Scarefest several years ago, which I still think is one of the most creative ideas for a horror movie ever. Killing people in their dreams. Saxon died in 2020, but he was an actor for something like 70 years, because he got his first role when he was a kid. He was a kid. Oh, and the story goes that he replaced Edmund O'Brien as Fuller in Black Christmas at the last minute, because Eddie had Alzheimer's and just couldn't do the role. So he was essentially fired when they realized that. Andrea Martin is in her mid-70s now, and she's still going strong. She won 2 Emmys way back, both times as a writer for the SCTV TV show. I guess all the cast members shared in that, so Moranis and Candy and all the rest. Andrea was in the big fat Greek wedding flicks, the first of which is one of the most successful movies ever when you compare budget to box office, like Halloween, for example. But she also had roles in Wag the Dog and Hedwig and the Angry Inch, both of which are reviews in our archives. Angry Inch, Angry Inch. If you're watching that show Evil, then you're seeing her to this day. She also played Mrs. Mack in the Black Christmas remake. I guess she's the only actor or actress from the original movie that was actually in the 2006 film. While Martin played Mrs. Mack over 30 years later, Marianne Waldman has that job in this version, and she has a lot of fun doing it. She's even more bawdy and booze-obsessed than any of the girls are, other than maybe Barb. Barb, by the way, has little whiskey bottles hanging off the wreath on her bedroom door. That was a fun touch. Anyway, Waldman was only in a few other movies, but 2 of them were called Deranged and Phobia. When she did appear in movies, they tended to be scary flicks. Doug McGrath, the police sergeant who doesn't understand what fellatio means, went on to play Coach Warren in Bob Clark's Porky's. He also worked with Spielberg, John Carpenter, and did several flicks with Eastwood, including Pale Rider. Nick Mancuso was the man on the phone making those psychotic prank calls. A woman was sometimes dubbed into the voice of Billy as well, which seems pretty clear, unless Mancuso had incredible vocal range. One of the tech guys, a camera operator I believe, played Billy when he did anything on screen, like kill people, and I guess it was his eye behind Barb's bedroom door? Not sure about that one. Mancuso, though, was supposedly never on set at all. Keir Dullea never played Billy in any way either, not even to throw us off. I thought I would read that he did, but I guess not. Just like Anthony Perkins is never actually in the shower scene in Psycho. He was making a play or something like that. They just used a stunt double. The director and also their producer was Bob Clark. The man made plenty of films, and many of the ones after his big 3 are terrible, but he's known for this, the raunchy sex comedy Porky's, and the classic holiday comedy A Christmas Story. That's a pretty good career for anybody. He's not Canadian, by the way, but he often made movies up here, and they often ended up being big hits. He directed Jack Lemmon to an Oscar nomination in Tribute, but what about those craptastic titles in his resume? Well, he also directed the Porky sequel, which made money, but far less than the first one did, and it was far less respected than the first Pork job was, which wasn't exactly respected either. But it gets worse. Bob was the man behind a couple Baby Geniuses movies, and Rhinestone. Action star Sly Stallone sings country music with Dolly Parton. I don't know how that could have failed so bad. Clarke came up with some great shots in this movie, and he certainly builds the tension extremely well. The actors are usually pretty good. Hussey stands out the most, which makes sense. She's the main character. And Carl Zitterer's very odd music score really works, but it's Clarke's blocking and camera placement that are the standout things on the technical side. And I guess they shot this in an actual house, which makes the camera work even more impressive, considering they had to work within the limits of real walls and real ceilings. It was Bob's idea not to show a bunch of nudity in this picture. In fact, is there any? He wanted to avoid the crutch of putting women in peril by stripping their clothes off. He also wanted to give them more personality, not just be sumptuous targets for the bad guy. So kudos for all that, although I wouldn't have been complaining if Kidder or Hussey had been a little less dressed at some points at least. And as I talked about in my Christmas Story episode last year, Clarke died when a drunk driver plowed into the director and his 22-year-old son while they were driving. Tragic ending, obviously more so for his son, but Clarke was far from done making movies. He was only in his 60s, I think. London, Ontario native Roy Moore wrote the script. He didn't write many others. He did get credit on the 2 remakes for writing the original Black Christmas, so I guess he got a couple paydays for doing nothing at all, nothing at all, nothing at all. And if Moore based this script on something that actually happened in a Canadian sorority, as some say he did, then that's pretty terrifying. The cinematographer was Reg Morris, the editor was Stan Cole, and the music man was Carl Zitterer, all of whom worked with Clarke on A Christmas Story and other projects. Oh, I should mention that I watched this on Canopy. If you feel like watching it, even after I've given away every major plot point, try Canopy. I love my free access. I think I watched it on YouTube a few years ago, so I checked a few days ago, and it's still free there, too. Not as good a print, but it's watchable. I burned through a few minutes of it just to confirm some things. Some say Black Christmas was one of the forerunners of the slasher flick, even ahead of Halloween, although it came more than a decade after Psycho and Peeping Tom, which were made by such great directors and made with such style. You can't pigeonhole those classics into just slasher movies. That's always a negative connotation. I enjoy the genre, so I don't even think it's an insult to call Halloween, Friday, Nightmare, those series is that anyway. But is this even a slasher film? He stabs Barb, but he used her toy unicorn to do it. This is definitely a whodunit. The Thin Man that I covered back in September was a whodunit too, so it's a theme lately. Clarke didn't want to show the brutal violence that was originally planned, and even though there's plenty of blood in this, it's not sprayed all over the screen. We see when girls and women are about to be killed, not so much the actual killing. Okay, Margot Kidder's death is gruesome, but even that is shot pretty artfully. And in the end, I was quite impressed with how good this thing was. I wasn't scared, but it is hard to scare me at movies anymore. Very rarely do I ever get freaked out too much. But I bet a 20-year-old female college student might be freaked out while watching this. There's some classic moments in this, including Claire and the plastic in the attic, the eyeball on the crack of the door, and the ending. I've seen the film at least 3 times, and I might check it out again in the next few years. So kudos to everyone involved. It's not like I'm talking up some unsung hero, though, because many people think this thing is pretty great. I'm just surprised how engrossing it was to me. I think, by the way, Rob Zombie says this is his favorite film. So that was how I saw Black Christmas. Before I promote the next episode and tell you how you can contact us, let's fire off 3 trivia questions. These are just questions I pulled from some of our trivia nights I've been hosting for our friends ever since the pandemic shut down the world. I've been doing this on my solo shows lately, and I'll keep doing it unless there's some kind of rude backlash to, I don't want to hear trivia, I can't hit the fast forward button. So if you like questions about movies that have nothing to do with Black Christmas, then you're going to love the next 30 to 45 seconds. Question number 1. Which black man has never played the American president in a movie? I'll give you some options. Jamie Foxx, Eddie Murphy, or Danny Glover. Question number 2. John Candy died while he was on location filming which movie? And question number 3. What is the name of the family dog in E.T.? That wasn't 45 seconds, that was more like 20 seconds, wasn't it? Okay, I'll tell you the answers after I tell you that the next time I talk to you crazy kids on my own won't be in 2 weeks. I'll have a solo show in 2 weeks on October 18th, yes. But Bev's monthly Monday off in October will be on the Canadian Thanksgiving, which is October 14th. So on that day, you will get a monologue about one of the greatest horror comedies ever made, Mel Brooks's Young Frankenstein. Putting on the roots. We'll have done Shaun of the Dead the week before that, so it'll be a theme of laughing at ghoulish things on the 7th and the 14th. And that's just 3 days from now, and Bev will be here to talk with me about Edgar Wright's 20-year-old classic Zom rom-com, Shaun of the Dead. Pickle. You can comment on our shows on Twix. @MovieFiend51 is my handle, and Bev's is @BevEllisEllis. If you're a Threads person, she's @BevEllisEllis on that site too. Rate our show and write a review on your podcast app. Also look for our shows on YouTube. It's just a podcast with our graphic, but hey, maybe it's easier for you to hear us that way than on your podcast app. Maybe you don't like podcast apps. Our address on YouTube is @HYESEllis, or click Have You Ever Seen into the search dealie on the Tubester. Comment on our shows, like them, and subscribe to us so you won't ever have to miss what we have to say. And Sparkplug Coffee is our sponsor. We'd appreciate if you check them out by typing in sparkplug.coffee, add /HYES to that address, and you will save 20% off your next order. And now the answers to those 3 trivia questions. How'd you do? Question number 1. Which black man has never played the American president in a movie? Jamie Foxx, Eddie Murphy, or Danny Glover? Eddie Murphy played a congressman in The Distinguished Gentleman, but that's as far up the political ladder as he's gotten. He's never played the prez. Question number 2. John Candy was in the middle of filming which movie when he died? It was a very forgettable comedy called Wagons East. And question number 3. What is the name of the family dog in E.T.? Harvey, although he's not a 6-foot rabbit. He's a golden retriever who learns to love an alien. Okay, that's that. Thanks a lot for listening to me ramble today. Join the Ellises on Monday when the topic of the day will be Shaun of the Dead. Meantime, I'm going to lock all our doors and windows. Oh wait, I do that already. Keir Dullea might be hanging out, trying to get in and make me keep the baby. And cut.